From Hollywood stardom to silence, the tragic fall of 1970s icons. She held an Oscar before she could ride a bike without training wheels. At 10 years old, she stood on a stage in front of the biggest names in the industry, the youngest person ever to win a competitive Academy Award. Cameras flashed. The world called her a prodigy. Flashbulbs went off as if she were already a seasoned star, not a fourth grader who should have been worrying about homework instead of headlines. But behind the golden statue was a little girl already learning that fame in Hollywood can be a gift wrapped around a curse. What happens when a child becomes a legend before she understands what that even means? And what happens when the applause fades and she's left to find herself in the wreckage? This is the story of Tatum O'Neal, the girl who had it all, and the woman who had to rebuild from nothing. The rise. Tatum O'Neal was born into Hollywood. Her father, Ryan O'Neal, was already one of the most bankable leading men in the business, and her mother, actress Joanna Moore, had her own career in film and television. But Tatum's childhood was anything but stable. Her parents divorced in 1967 when Tatum was just 3 years old, and she and her younger brother Griffin were largely left in their mother's care. It was not a safe place to grow up. By the time Tatum was 6, the courts had stepped in, and her mother lost custody of both children amid struggles with addiction. Tatum was sent to live with her father, a man who was charismatic on camera but, by her own later account, unpredictable behind closed doors. Acting wasn't something she dreamed of, it found her. In 1973, director Peter Bogdanovich cast her opposite her own father in a black-and-white road movie about a con artist and the orphaned girl who becomes his accomplice. The film was called Paper Moon. Tatum had turned 9 years old during filming, with no formal acting training, no agent pushing her into the room, just the daughter of the film's star, brought along almost by accident. She played Addie Loggins, a sharp-tongued, cigarette-bumming kid who could outwit grown men twice her size. Audiences fell in love with her instantly. Critics called her performance one of the most natural ever captured on film by a child actor. Nobody, not even Tatum, expected what would come next. The peak. On April 10, 1974, Tatum O'Neal walked onto the stage at the Academy Awards and accepted the Oscar for Best Supporting Actress, presented to her by Charles Bronson and Jill Ireland. She was 10 years old. To this day, no one younger has ever won a competitive Academy Award. That same year, she also took home the Golden Globe for New Star of the Year. Overnight, she became one of the most famous children in America, and reportedly the highest-paid child actor in Hollywood history at the time. Magazine covers, talk shows, premieres, she was thrust into a world of adults who treated her like a peer instead of a child. She followed her Oscar win with the Bad News Bears in 1976, playing the only girl on a ragtag Little League team, a role that made her a household name to a whole new generation. Then came Nickelodeon, and later Little Darlings, where she shared the screen with Christy McNichol in a coming-of-age story that became a cult favorite. For a few years, Tatum O'Neal wasn't just a child star. She was one of the biggest names in the industry, full stop. She was invited to the same parties as A-list adults, photographed beside major stars, and treated by the press as Hollywood royalty in miniature. It seemed like nothing could touch her. The beginning of the fall, but the same spotlight that made her famous also exposed the cracks underneath. Tatum has spoken publicly, including in her own memoirs, about a childhood marked by instability, a mother who struggled with alcohol, and a father whose relationship with her grew distant and strained, particularly after he began a long relationship with Charlie's Angels star Farrah Fawcett. The warmth Hollywood saw on screen between father and daughter didn't always extend to life off camera. She later described a household that looked perfect from the outside. The Malibu home, the expensive cars, the famous friends, but felt isolating and lonely on the inside, a glamorous veneer hiding a childhood with very little structure or protection. The warning signs were there for anyone paying attention. A young girl with no school routine, no peer group her own age, and a level of independence no child that age should have. By her late teens, the pressures of fame, family turmoil, and a childhood spent surrounded by adults instead of other kids began to take their toll. She started drifting away from the structure that any teenager needs and toward a far more chaotic path. In 1986, she married tennis legend John McEnroe, and the two had 3 children together. For a moment it looked like Tatum might be building the stable life that had eluded her as a child. But the marriage became one of the most publicized and difficult celebrity divorces of the 1990s, finalized in 1994, and it left her once again in the spotlight for the wrong reasons. The downfall. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, Tatum O'Neal's name appeared in headlines less for her work and more for her personal struggles. She has openly discussed battling addiction for years, a battle that played out at times in full public view, including a publicized drug arrest. Custody disputes over her children with McEnroe became tabloid fodder. Her relationship with her father remained fractured for decades, marked by public estrangements and reconciliations that never seemed to fully hold. The acting career that once seemed limitless slowed to guest appearances on shows like Sex and the City and Law and Order: Criminal Intent, along with a recurring role on the firefighter drama Rescue Me, work but a far cry from the leading roles of her childhood. In 2004 she published a memoir, A Paper Life, laying bare the abandonment and chaos that had shaped her since before she ever won that Oscar. It was a bestseller, but it also meant reliving, in public, the very pain that fame had never let her process in private. 7 years later she returned with a second book, Found, A Daughter's Journey Home, this time focusing on her long road toward sobriety and her attempt to rebuild a relationship with her father after decades of distance. That same effort to reconcile was captured on camera for an OWN network docuseries called Ryan and Tatum: The O'Neals, putting one of Hollywood's most fractured father-daughter relationships in front of the public once again. Through it all, Tatum kept returning to a single theme in her interviews, that survival, not stardom, had become the real measure of her life. Then, in 2020, she suffered a major medical crisis, including an overdose and a stroke that nearly took her life. When her father, Ryan O'Neal, died in December 2023, the two had spent years trying, and often failing, to repair their relationship, and Tatum later revealed that he had cut her out of his will entirely, a final, painful chapter in a lifelong story of love and resentment that never found peace. Where are they now, Slaskies? Today, Tatum O'Neal is in her early 60s, and her record still stands. More than 50 years after Paper Moon, no actor younger than her has ever won a competitive Oscar. A handful of even younger performers have come close to taking the title since. Justin Henry was nominated at 8 for Kramer vs. Kramer, and Quvenzhané Wallis at 9 for Beasts of the Southern Wild. But neither walked away with the win, and Tatum's name remains the answer to one of Hollywood's most enduring trivia questions. She has continued to act in smaller roles, written candidly about her life in multiple books, and spoken openly about addiction and recovery, using her own story to be honest about the cost of fame few people ever see. Her journey is a reminder that an Academy Award can sit on a shelf next to childhood, but it can never replace it. Tatum O'Neal didn't lose her fame to one scandal or one bad decision. She lost the chance at an ordinary life the moment the cameras turned toward a 9-year-old girl in a black and white movie about con artists, and spent the rest of her life trying to find her way back to herself. In Hollywood, the brightest spotlight often falls hardest on those too young to step out of its glare. And sometimes, the real story isn't how a star fell, it's how long they had to fight just to stand back up.